Okay, so laba diena, ačiū labai, kad atėjote, sveiki visi susirinkę. Kamerų filmuoja, ar ne? Filmuoja, labai gerai. Štai jinai. Sveiki susirinkę visi. Mano vardas Mykolas Katkus ir aš netrukus perėsiu anglų kalbą. Man labai malonu pristatyti Morteną Rud Pederseną, vieną turbūt įspūdingiausių ir didžiausių šiuolaikinių Europos lobistų, žmogų turinti labai įdomų backgroundą, jis yra pradėjęs nuo profesinių sąjungų judėjimo, nuo darbo politikoje ir paskui perėjo į tokį interesų atstovavimo sritį, jis ten yra labai sėkmingas. Ir aš šiandien kalbėsiu turbūt, aš turiu pasirašęs 12 klausimų, kur aš klausiu Morteno, jie tokie pakankamai yra išsamus, bet aš daugiausia kalbėsiu apie dalykus, kurie yra susijęs su lobizmo etika, su lobizmo apskritai atsiradimu, šiek tiek patį Morteną, ir su taip pat su Europos Sąjungos politika ir apskritai, ką tai reiškia atstovauti interesus didelėje Europos Sąjungoje, nacionalinėje sąjungoje ir ką tai reiškia ypatingai dabar po Brexito ir po visų kitų dalykų. So I'm coming back to English. Morten, nice to meet you. Morten Rud Pedersen. So the way we do this, so I will ask you some questions and then we will ask people to ask questions as well. Yep. And of course, probably the professor wants to add something or to say no need that or so on. Okay. So Morten, first of all, I would like to have a personal reminiscence for you. So you were I know the story, but if you can tell it again. So you were a young person when the Soviet wall fell. You know, when the Soviet empire fell. You were a young person, you were a student at the time, and young Dane, as you described yourself, and you also were already working in politics when Lithuania joined the EU. What were your reminiscences of this time? You know, what you expecting from us, from Lithuania and all the new Eastern Bloc countries joining the EU?
What I expected and what I did,
yeah.
I can say that in 1989 we were, yes, that's many years ago, we were a group of, at that time, young Danish people who were kind of demonstrating that we were on the left side, but we were not communists. So we wanted to make a friendship tour to the Soviet Republic and discuss human rights. And we did that because 2 years earlier we went to the Nevada desert to protest against the Russian unilateral nuclear ban, which Mr. Reagan then decided that he would not respect. So we sent a lot of Danes to the desert in Nevada, and at that time all the liberal conservatives in our country called us communists. And in order to demonstrate that we were not communist, we went then to take the tour to the Soviet Union, and I was leading a delegation to Murmansk. We ended up 3,000 persons in Moscow in August '89, and our general demand was that we should take down the Iron Curtain in Europe, and we were at the age, I was 26, thinking that all people should be free and work together. And then we came home, and by a mistake or by not a mistake, then Eastern Germany's ambassador in Budapest managed to open the door to Germany, and then Germans via coming to Budapest, East Germans could go out to Europe, and I felt at that time that something is happening. I mean, everybody could see that something was happening, but we were, as Western youngsters, brought up in the way that there were two parts of Europe, one part where we could freely move and talk and discuss, and another part with whom we could not really enter into discussions. And this kind of movement made many of us very interested and very willing to start to do things. So the first thing I did in '89 was that I definitely wanted to go to Berlin. So I went down to Berlin in '89, and on the 21st of December, when they opened the Berlin Wall, I was one of the tens of thousands of people who walked through the Berlin Wall at Brandenburger Tor, and my German was not so good, but they were singing this song, Mauer weg, ohne Mauer gibt es keine Grenze. And this was like attending a very big national German party, and I was the only one there with no Einladung. I walked in with these people at True Brandenburger Tor, at Unter den Linden, and that's kind of where everything started in my head. So I was a little bit proud when we 1st of June last year opened our office in Germany at Unter den Linden number 32, because it was like, for me, the history kind of coming back to a logic. But that feeling that things were happening in Europe was so dramatically in me. So I was part of the young social democrats in Denmark at that time. I went to them and said, why shouldn't we open a kind of youth embassy in Prague? Why don't we send me to Prague? So I was sent to Prague, and I worked there for half a year, making contacts with people in Central and Eastern Europe on how can you say, how the new democracy would work. And I found some people, they called themselves young social democrats, and they said, I asked them why they thought I was there. They said, you are here because we are now all in Europe, and your job, you're a social democrat, but it's also to unite all the small countries against Germany. That was, of course, not the mandate, but that was the way they were looking at it. My feeling is that people at that age were a little bit ashamed of the poverty of the country, that they were simply poor, but they could accuse the lack of freedom and market economy and say that that is why we are poor people today. So when I continued to visit these countries years after year, I came also to a situation where people couldn't really understand why it didn't go faster with the transition. So that is a little bit a long explanation on how I saw things. So I was very happy to be able to be one of them who actually tried to involve himself in the process. And I'm equally a little bit ashamed that I'm one of them who have been grown up and being an adult in Europe at the same time as what happened in Yugoslavia happened, and that we didn't at that time manage to intervene in that happenings, because that is, how can you say, one of the things which I would think would be difficult to discuss or explain to next generations.
Mm-hmm. So what do you expect from us? We expected from you money. I mean, this is clear. You know, we were poor. We wanted money. We wanted freedom. We wanted, to become free and so on. And what did you expect from us? I mean, what kind of idea? What do you want it to be? Some kind of missionaries who bringing the post-colonist East some democracy light, or you expected something from us to change the European Union when all these countries started one after another joining?
Yes, but I remember that at that time I joined in 91 I joined the European Confederation of Trade Unions, and I worked there from 91 to 99. From 95 to 99 I was the managing director. But in the first years, I think that countries joining who were former part of the area behind the Iron Curtain, as we would see it, was representing a threat to the working population in Europe, because there would be undermining social conditions and pay and things like that. But and so it was a threat at the same time as it was, of course, a welcoming thing that everybody now could be together. But I think there was a mixed feeling that what will happen now, because the Western side had built it up so high social standards, then that they kind of feared what was happening. If you see what is happening in Poland now, then the Polish workers is going home from, in principle, all the Western countries to Poland, because working conditions and pay are going up, and they are lacking in all the building sites around in Europe. So things have certainly turned around.
So you were afraid of us, right? Afraid you, as a labor union, trade union, you were afraid of cheap Eastern workforce, which would come and swarm the welfare systems, right?
I think so.
Okay. Let me talk a little bit about this trade union stuff. So you were the trade unionist, right? And you were the general manager. Does that mean that you kind of controlled all the trade union associations in Brussels?
No, it doesn't mean that. It means that I was the managing director, but over me I had a general secretary.
Okay. Okay.
So that you had.
So general manager is less than general secretary in trade unions.
In politically, how can you say, French-oriented organization, the general secretary is number one. And then I was responsible for all our organization, all our money, all our recruitment, that things were working. And over me I had a general secretary, an Italian one, and he was politically elected. So I was the highest employed person.
Were you successful by representing, that was the first representation job, were you successful in representing interests of labor unions?
I think we were very successful. The Maastricht deal somehow gave the first co-representation for unions and employers at equal level, at European level. Before that, everything had been decided on the European Union on a level where it should be implemented throughout the how can you say, the countries. At that time, there was given a right to a kind of social consultation who could propose legislation which should then be given directly to the council, and that was a major breakthrough. I think it was also a breakthrough which was criticized a lot in the labor unions, because actually they didn't want to hand over that power to the European level, but the European leaders wanted to have it. So they kind of trapped it into the discussion. I can say now it's even recorded. So, but that is actually what happened.
But now there is this German model where labor unions, trade unions are a big part of a company's management. So in Lithuania we also have this. We have this bilateral, trilateral council where the trade unions, the labor unions, the business representatives, and the government talks together. You know, it's with some kind of committee, and this is kind of basically it should run all the main decisions regarding laws and stuff what is connected to that. Do you think it's a good model? Do you think it's in Germany, of course, labor unions are extremely important and extremely powerful. In Germany, in some other countries as well, in some other countries not as well, especially in the Eastern Bloc, like in Lithuania. Do you think the labor unions should have a say should have a bigger say, a smaller say in the relationships, in the how the countries are being run, in the policy matters?
I think basically the labor union can, in cooperation with the employers' organization, offer peace at the labor market, and that is extremely important for production. So it's not really a question of thinking, it is a question of if you can create a situation where you, instead of conflicts at the labor market, has peace, and that you can negotiate what should be the condition for that peace, then you have a much more effective working labor market structure. And that is, of course, what tried to be introduced with the Maastricht Treaty in the European Union. The deal is, if you are not familiar with it, that the unions and the employers can, if they agree, ask the Commission to propose the text. That means that the text will not be negotiated before it's submitted, and then it can be rejected or adopted. But that means that the two parties at the European level would, I don't know if it's a mandate after that, but they could actually negotiate these discussions. That meant that these labor questions were removed from the national level, and that was not very popular. So our members at the European Union level in the different countries were not very fond of that this happened. But since it happened, it gave the European organization a very powerful position. And I think, to be honest, would it have been like that, I would probably not have been the managing director of that organization, because I joined a little bit an organization not being very important. And then suddenly we got a lot of power, and I was sitting in the middle of it. So it was great fun.
So what does it mean to have power in Brussels by being a labor union managing director?
No, it means that you can actually influence things which will have effect in reality. So I have a saying that to be busy in Brussels is not very difficult, but to be busy doing the right things is very difficult, because there is a lot of people around the different processes. But if you are one of them who can actually negotiate what is happening, then it is difficult.
Now, so it's interesting. We will talk a little bit about the country divide in Brussels and country representation, but it's also interesting other divide. The business, trade union, commission divide. Is it also the power structure between these dynamics? Is this dynamics still important in the European Union? The dynamics between not the country dynamics, like the Germans versus French or something like that, but the dynamics of, for example, business confederations, associations, lobbyists for business from the one hand, labor unions and the commission from the other hand. Is this power dynamics important in Brussels, or it's just more or less just a sector thing?
No, I think you can distinguish between being I don't know if this is a correct English word, adoptive. So those who are adopting laws and regulations and directives and things like that, they of course have a formal right to say yes or to say no. These people are important. And at the end of the day, it will be Germans plus somebody else. They are important people. Now, you can't adopt things which has not been proposed. And that means that I always say that if you are a creative person and you can take a lot of initiatives, you can actually steer things. You can move it onto a level where somebody would have to decide to adopt or reject. And that doesn't take size. That takes a good mind and creativity. And that is the beautiful thing about Brussels, that there are so many people fishing there, that some of them are small and come with good ideas, and if they are content driven, then they also have a very good chance of succeeding. I think that we run a company in 9 countries, and I used to say that it is in 8 countries and then Brussels, and everybody understands that Brussels is not a country, because Brussels business is the only business we are involved in where re-election and media play a much lesser role than in all the other countries, because in other countries politicians act with a view, of course, of doing good things, but always with the view of being re-elected. And media try to find scandals or kind of hooks which will sell papers and disclose things, but for the short-term perspective. In Brussels, we have a very big commission operating a system where they are looking at content and facts. And I used to say what we need in Brussels is very good English-speaking lawyers, because they need to understand how the system works, operate it in the right time frame, and then have real arguments. And imagine if politics were like that. That would be wonderful in all the other countries as well. But there you have politicians wanting to be re-elected, and you have media wanting to disclose everything, focusing on things which are not necessarily politically important, but is important from all other points of view. How much do they earn? Do they meet up in the parliament? How much are the per diems? Are the pension rules correct? And things which, of course, are important, but not necessarily politically important.
Speaking about Commission, one former member of European Parliament, long-term member of, is a kind of a titan of Spanish politics. In one private speech, told me that if Maastricht Treaty would have to be negotiated these days, it was have never been done in the way it was, because he said that at that time people just went to negotiate Maastricht Treaty. They closed down doors and went out after half a year. There were some leaks, of course, but nothing too much leaked. And they said, this is Maastricht Treaty, we have to sign it, or Schengen Agreement. And these days, if there is something happening, media immediately gets it was leaked, the first draft, second draft, first proposal. And he's basically saying was that Brussels cannot agree on anything important these days, just because the process became so transparent and there are so many actors in it that it's almost impossible to agree on anything. And we have our own position with Istanbul Convention, when nobody has read the damn paper, but everybody doesn't want to sign it. So his speech was that these days Maastricht Treaty would never be signed because of the leaks and because of too many people will be commenting about the actual document in the newspapers or in the blogs or in the Twitter, you know, and that basically his feeling that nothing so monumental cannot be done these days in general. Was he right, or was just old man grumping his problems?
I don't think so, but it's probably a good story.
But is he right? Can you agree on some really big issue like Maastricht Treaty in the current media?
I mean, I think, by the way, imagine that we should have done all these pandemic funds in a situation with an interest rate of 4 instead of an interest hardly existing. How would that have happened? But how could you say? It's just a thing which came into my mind here one of the days. No, but I think Europe has proven with how can you say, with establishing all the fund for fighting the pandemics together, that you can agree on things. And that was actually what we were looking at years ago, where I think it was in 2009-10, where we had a problem financing a new package. We succeeded in doing that in 2020. So I think that is the proof that it can happen.
Morten, do you switch sides? Do you agree that you switch sides coming from the sides? You know, you were working as a labor union, general manager. You know, it's a big position, powerful position from the labor unions, and then now when you established your own business, where you are mainly working for business clients. Did you switch sides, or does interest representation is universal and you cannot say that it's some kind of one side or another side?
No, I'm a social democrat, and I was a social democrat when I started.
You are leftist. You were leftist. You were demonstrating.
I'm a left social democrat, and I'm still. And I discovered, I mean, with all these Facebook things, I discovered that kind of 6 years ago we had one of our staff members in Sweden. He was a member of the Green Party, and he was posting that tomorrow morning I go to work on the dark side. I mean, okay. So I decided that this was a little bit a problem, because we can't be seen as a dark side if we think we are doing good things for society. So at that time we were assembling all staff once a year. And this was just on the eve of these things, and that was in Berlin in 2016. And I held a speech to all the people trying to explain what is our contribution to society. I mean,
and what is this very interesting?
There is maybe not so many lobby companies who will actually stand up and say, how do they contribute? And I think we contribute in the way that we help international company enter markets in countries they do not know. We enlarge the scope for having different bidders in most public tenders. We make this process more transparent and international to the benefit of taxpayers and people in different countries. And this is a way of making the international economy work. It's a way of taking scientifically results from one country and with how can you say, in new product forms, actually allowing them to go to other markets. We do that, so how can you say, we are connecting people at the business market. And we do this with a very high ethical standard. We have all our 340 persons we have assigning a code of conduct where we are looking into, how can you say, business ethical questions. We have signed that. All people whom we meet, we speak to about who we represent, if we are representing people, and what is the purpose of the project. So we are transparifying, if you can use that word, the business. And you can say, but why do we need lobbyists to do that? If that is so easy, why can't anybody just do it? So what is it we bring to the table? We understand how the political system works. We understand that 1 + 1 is not necessarily 2, that we can having a company being hit by a regulation, a new law, in a way which was not foreseen by the political system, we can actually, by speaking about these consequences in a political way, we can make the political system understand that their proposal doesn't work as it was intended. My general tagline is that if politics were logic, we would have no business. So what we can do is that we can help business life to understand the illogical behavior of the political system, so that it's not enough just to say that they are all idiots or they don't understand anything, but you simply need to understand how to operate it. And I used this to tell him and the rest of our staff, we were 160 persons in Berlin, that we are contributing by adding value because we are helping the system to work actually how it should work. Because politicians are people who want to take good decisions, but they can't always understand all the consequences. And when drafting these things, when proposing these things, we will help them in a good way to have more information. And I actually have a word for that. I call it to burden people with proof. So nobody wants to take a decision knowing that the decision is not good, unless they are evil people, but very few people are evil. So if you can bring to the political system analysis which are credible, maybe done in this university, before decisions are taken on the way a decision will affect an industry in a negative way, you have created a very valuable argument. And that is where I see us. So the alternative to, how can you say, the old style lobbying is the new style lobbying. That is that we take our point of departure in facts, and we in a very creative way try to balance these facts so that people understand them. And in this way we help people taking decisions.
Mm-hmm. So it's this really new style lobbying, or as you once said, Nordic style, Nordic roots lobbying, or something like that. But tell me, how come that Nordics does not have any political lobbying scandals? Because in Lithuania, I think we're tired of them. It's like not always scandals are real scandals. Sometimes it's someone is accused and then released. But I think during the last 5 years, each year we have at least one big scandal. Someone gets caught by proposing a bribe to a politician, to vote for a law. Someone is accused of using illegal representation means in the parliament, or someone was just again bought by with a big bag of money in a vodka box, by the way, and go to court, and all these measures are usually called corruption, but the word lobbying is also used. So therefore, word lobbying and word corruption are very close to us, and sometimes if you're saying that someone is doing lobbying, you're basically saying that it's a negative thing. So how did your countries, your systems manage the way itself that you don't have these scandals, or at least have much less than we do?
I just think that we are a little bit ahead of you on this. I think that informed societies where people understand that if I do something wrong, it will be seen and I will be punished, will probably change the behavior. So it's not like we don't want to have things, or we don't like money, or things like that. I think our way of looking at the ethical questions is partly built on the knowledge that people will be caught in it, which is a fact. So when we have in principle no criminal behavior in this part, then it is because our policing systems works very well. And that if you are testing to do this, then you will be caught. And it's not like we don't have it, but we have from time to time these things happening. And then people are caught. In the cases where they are not caught, we don't know about it. So I would say that we have a relatively very extremely low level of corruption, but I would not say that it is not existing. That is one thing. The second thing is that I think generally the people who should be corrupted are very well off. And they are so well off that it is in our Nordic societies very difficult to use this money which you would, how can you say, get from corruption in another way, because we are so small societies that everybody will see that. And so what's the fun of it? I don't think that there is an economic motivator for people to endanger their positions to move out to corruption issues.
But there is also a thing of trust, because what happened in Lithuania after these scandals, what happens that politicians for a while stopped listening to all the interests, you know? And that's also not a very good thing, because if there is a scandal, so then politicians start saying, okay, each representative of interest which comes to me is he's a potential corrupt guy, and I want to avoid to be seen with him, and therefore, for example, if sometimes even after the coronavirus things, sometimes even the meetings are coming without any representation from other people, so the group of interest do not have even a chance to present the point of view, and they just go there and they say, oh, we're fighting corruption, we don't want to hear from you, evil guys. So it kind of comes with anti-corruption drive. At some point, it comes to it kind of comes to the stage where the normal arguments cannot be heard, and this is like some kind of another what to say, wave.
But you can say that the 4 Nordic countries are a little bit special in the way that we have no lobby register, so nobody knows who is speaking to whom when. And I think we have in Sweden and Norway, we have a kind of revolving door mechanism where ex-ministers will be questioned by a parliamentary committee if they are entering into a job in the private sector. We company employed the former Minister of Defense in Norway, and that was not a problem to, even that we are a defense lobbyist company. It was not a problem to employ her. We simply just got a letter from the Stortinget, as it's called, the parliament, that she could not work on any defense matters for the first year, and we respected that. So that, I think that is a little bit the trick, that she is the former Minister of Defense. She lines up next to me, and we agree that these are the rules. And we didn't cheat on the rules. She was not involved in the things, and so there is also a big respect for the system, and it's also an ethical question, because you don't want to be placed in a debate like this one where you can be questioned if you have a high morale, if you have highest ethical standards. So some people would say, but how could she work for that company at all? But it works now in Denmark, and in Finland now they are having a lobby register discussion up for discussion for the next parliamentary election that is underway. But in Denmark and Norway and Sweden there is nothing.
So, but you always say that you follow all the lobby laws which are there, how politicians want to be approached, but ideally, do you support some kind of register, like Brussels style or Lithuanian style register for lobbyists, or do you think that there should be some? I mean, there is always this question about this formality and informality of rules. The less trust you have, the more formal you should be. The more trust you have, the less formal you can be in these things. Where would you put the line on this? Do you think this Nordic model without any formality is better, or this Brussels model that, or Lithuanian model that you have to register each thing you are working on the lobby register?
But my view is a little bit special here, because you can, if you are a company, in principle hire us to work for whatever you want, as long as we feel that the process is transparent and that we can do it in the right way. But influencing the way the politicians should regulate lobbyists, I think that is a matter solely for the politicians. And I think that is the political system's working relationship conditions. So our commitment is that we would follow whatever rules exist, but we would not find it correct that we should influence that rule If you go in on the Brussels Transparency Register, you can see all our clients. You can even see how much money they pay for us. I can factually saying that if that was working in all other European countries, some of our clients would not be our clients. And that is not because it's necessarily wrong what we do for them. It is that we might help somebody in a company to perform the job which the person actually have been hired to do. Which means that if anybody can read in a register that company is hiring us, then the person in that position will be questioned. Why don't you do this yourself? There will be a number of things which we can't do. And at that time, you would also have to, how can you say, discuss what shall you do with lawyers? Are lawyers also lobbyists? Are industry federations also lobbyists? Shall all politicians, each time they have a contact with somebody discussing a topic, register it? Does that also go for family or family parties? Or what happens if you meet somebody in a nightclub? I mean, so these things kind of, it's a difficult and complicated area. I don't want to engage in that, so let's leave that for the politicians.
Let's engage in that area. You are the biggest buyer of former politicians in Scandinavia.
I don't see it like that.
Okay, I'm exaggerating, of course, but you hire a lot of people. I know. I think first time I looked at your website, I saw that. Somehow I remember was this guy Andreas Borg. He used to be some kind of a mentor to Šimonytė. He used to be a tough Swedish finance minister during the crisis of 2009. And I saw that Mr. Borg is working for you, and now I think he's chairing the board of Rud Pedersen, right?
No, I'm the chair of the board.
But he's board member. Okay, I'm sorry. So why do you hire these people? And is it ethical to hire a former minister of finance and then to acquire and then to, after 1 year, go and change the taxation system or something like that?
So you can say that when we hire former ministers,
or generals. Or,
no, with former ministers or people who have had a very high position in a country, then they have normally received information which they cannot share in their capacity as a minister. So they can have been in the National Security Council, or they have simply secret information. That secrecy, if you can call it that, that goes with them until they die. So we can't buy that. But what we can do is that those people who have been in very important regulatory or political decision-making processes, positions, they have a unique understanding on how the system works. And that is what we can share with our clients, so that the better you understand how a political system works, the better you can, of course, prepare yourself if you have a problem or if you want to do something. And that is what we are selling.
But generally, it's actually a two-sided question. I want to hear your perspective. So, in Lithuania, we have a system where we don't but we don't like our previous ministers, right? There are not many ministers. If a person is out of politics, usually he's out of job for a while too. I mean, I can name a few, on my hand, people who were successful, like Mr. Bishola, who was successful after completing his position. Either they stay within the party. If they go out of politics, they usually are, they are floating somewhere around. And of course, it's good that there are some systems which takes care about these people. They have something to do because they have experience. From the other hand, there are a number of scandals, not only in Lithuania. You can take a Burismo scandal, in the United States of America. You can take a lot of scandals where, for example, general from the US is sitting in the board of a company which then goes bankrupt. Terranos was a general who used to be John Mattis was sitting on the board of Terranos. He was a general. He quit his service, and the company goes bankrupt, and he was doing something on this board, or some other companies, some financial companies are hiring former politicians or former people with connections to sit on the boards. Is it and sometimes people say, okay, these guys want to game the system, they want to gain access to the system and want to access knowledge nobody has. So from one hand, it's not good to get people rot in poverty after you kind of use them for the service. And from other hand, there is always a question of morality in these things, and the same with you. So again, where would you put a sign on this? Are you a big enthusiast of using all the politicians to work to do something good for the benefit of private sector, for example?
We hire everybody who is who can bring something to the table, who is smart and intelligent. And even if they have been former ministers, they will fit into our group. so it is not the same as all former ministers will fit into our group, but many of these people have special knowledge about how a system works, and that is of course interesting. Mm-hmm. But basically, what you need if you should join our company is that you need to be able to take an, how can you say, outside the box view. And help people to find out how can the existing of the system deal with the current problem you have, and can you see other ways? Because most people come to us when they have had a problem and they see that they can't manage it themselves. So then it's not like we want to drive the car the second time into the door and suddenly you can bang your head and it doesn't work. So this knowledgeable people who are smart and intelligent, we can use, and I hope that also people in Lithuania are like that. But I don't know how that works. But it's an interesting topic. Okay, coming back to a socialist agenda, I cannot come back to it. I mean, you are a leftist, and now you represent the companies. You said that it's good because the companies international companies are coming to market and making market more important. So you are market-believing socialist, right? Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Can you clarify?
I don't know. Do I need to clarify now? We have social democratic governments in the 4 Nordic countries.
So this is the Nordic social democrats, and we believe in markets. That's a surprise to me.
I think the best prediction is that Germany will also soon come.
And also market-believing social democrats, really.
More, I think, yeah. So I politically, I think the idea is, of course, that to use the best methods for creating wealth. And these methods are not necessarily the best methods to dividing wealth. So that is kind of my trick. I think that you use the sword in 2 ways. So you can produce and you can divide. And if there is nothing produced, there is then also nothing to divide.
But we don't live in a place times of cancel culture. So a person of cancel culture. So a person cancels someone. Have you cancelled any clients, Morten?
If I have cancelled clients,
because this client is not good for you as a social democrat, have you personally cancelled a client as a social democrat?
A client whom I wouldn't work with for ethical reasons, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. 2.
Okay, and you work with all the rest, right?
Sorry?
You work with all the rest. Or isn't it a thing that sometimes you, a consultant, I know that I'm not a lobbyist, I'm not a public affairs person, but I know from my experience that sometimes when you work with a client and present him how the public thinks, a client changes himself. Mm. That's the healing power of the public. The public, if a person thinks that he cannot outwit or outsmart or kind of lie to the public, he understands that when he has to change. And then he changes, and it's for the good of a society.
I think that's a very good observation, that very often the client comes with a problem, and the problem is that society doesn't want to do exactly what the client, the company in this case, would like to do. And then if you can explain that in a good way, then they can find another approach to do the same, or something similar. And so we very often find ourselves in between the political system and the business system. And that is what I mean when I say that we make society work, because it doesn't need to be a failure each time. And that is especially when foreign companies enter European countries, or a European country enter to discuss in another country, then they need some guidance in how do I make this kind of process work. I think that's important,
I think it's very, very important observation. Now, okay, so we talked a little bit about socialism, but now let's talk about smaller countries. So Lithuania comes, and the dreaded employees from Lithuania comes first.
That was years ago.
Yeah, threatened, but now the companies from Lithuania comes to the European Union. You also, I mean, both Denmark and Sweden, it can seem big for us, right? But you know, it's small countries in European Union and not very influential countries in European Union. Do you represent the business interests in Brussels or in other countries, and what is the best way to do it?
In Brussels, we work, and you can see that on this list. We work mainly for industry federations, and their questions are very much related to Green Deal. And all the, how can you say, the new ways the Commission should support things. That is our main thing in Brussels.
But for example, if a Swedish company wants to enter Norwegian market, or a Finnish company wants to enter Denmark, this is what you do, right?
This we do, yeah.
Yeah, and how does it work with trans? I mean, how do you represent the smaller countries' interests in bigger countries, like in Germany, for example?
But you can say that is maybe not so much lobbying. That is more business consulting. So a smaller, a smarter guy or woman in a kind of one country develops a product, and now they want to sell it to another country. So we could do the market research thing, and we could kind of identify the obstacles for the pure market communication. Then we would normally not do the market communication in all places. In some places we even have offices doing market communication. So you can say that we would be a political troubleshooter for small companies moving to new markets. I mean, you don't imagine how naive small companies can be, but they have still a kind of desire to grow. And we can really help them in overcoming, how can you say, for them very difficult steps, but for us very easy steps. In the beginning, set them up with the right persons, test their products in the right cities, understanding which cities, if you have technical applications you would like somebody in the Nordics to endorse, we would know where to do it. We would know who to approach. We would know who would love to do it. So instead of you just come in and you start phoning people, we know who are the technical, friendly, endorsing opportunity municipalities to work with. Things like that we know.
I can tell a story, like several Lithuanian companies, for some reason, IT companies wanted to enter the Finnish market. And they repeatedly tried, and one of his companies invested more than 1 million liters. It was still in early 2000s. And they couldn't, because they kind of knew that some box needs to be filled in all the public tenders, and this box was something about data security. We didn't have that. And they spent money on basically nothing. They kind of hired people, they started there, and they just didn't know the regulations, and were afraid or didn't know how to ask for these things. But when it comes to larger things, I think the first time we met, you spoke about the fact that it's very important, if you want to have real power in Brussels, you need to have more countries banding together each other. And you said that Nordics and Baltics are very natural allies. It's a very natural allies. And you also told me that Brexit, that was one of the reasons why it is so important was that Brexit happened, and the internal politics of European Union has changed. Mm.
I think that is a major problem, and this is really major, because I think most northern countries and also Baltic countries have been hiding behind London in all kind of regulatory issues over many last years.
Really? So we were behind London, right?
Hiding behind, yeah. Okay. No?
No, I'm interested. I've never heard this phrase before.
No? And I think that that the way politicians had to kind of participate in the European Union discussion were that London would speak the the voice of those who didn't wanted, how can you say, red tape to fall down over everything. And now you have a situation where London is out, the Germans are confused and have to find their own legs, and it's probably the first time in 20 years where we'll not have a CDU chancellor, so they will have a lot of time and they would need a lot of energy internally to find out what to do. And then you will have the French system sitting and wanting to regulate things, and you will have the Nordic region unable to mount a blocking minority to counter that. And before, we have been hiding behind London because we didn't need to move forward and say we do not agree on this or that on that, because London was kind of blocking that. And that is a major shift.
But it's interesting, the socialist Nordic countries were hiding behind the liberal and conservative London, banding together in European Union. That probably just shows how fluid ideologies can be, and one country social democrat can be, other countries conservative.
I think so. Yeah, maybe it's interesting, but it's a fact. And it has to be, you can say that we have maybe different political viewpoints in our countries, but we are still fundamentally, how can you say, representing our nations. And if you are sitting up there and looking down at our countries, then there is not such a big difference between the two sides in politics anyway.
But is it a coincidence that, for example, during this commission, there are no important positions which were assigned to representatives of the Nordics or the Baltics for this year?
No, you said so, yeah.
It is right? But basically they gave positions to Germans, to French, but not to southern countries, but not to the Nordics.
Vice president, but Vestager is so, but.
But I mean, no biggest positions,
not the biggest positions.
Yeah.
But we are also an extremely small country.
Yeah, I get it. But
not in the EU. So, yeah.
Okay. Now, so Brexit changes. People are moving on. How do you envision the internal? And also now we have this I would say Polish and Hungarian bloc, which is kind of destabilizing and having totally different thoughts how European Union should run. What do you think about that? How that changes the power dynamics? Now I read today in the Financial Times that Ursula von der Leyen was being pressured by Ursula von der Leyen. She was pressured to punish harshly Poles for their excursions, for their adventurism in legal systems. how that might change the whole internal dynamics of the European Union, and of course, will the European Union survive that? If the Poles, will Poles continue to pressure things in the corner? I know that you visit Poland next week.
Tomorrow morning. I'm off to Warsaw. We are establishing an office there, and I think it's a fact that the ruling party in Poland are using, how can you say, this conflict, because they will mount backing behind them, but still there is far from a majority in Poland who would leave the European Union. So you should see this also as a kind of domestic game. There is no political will in Poland to leave. And of course, the European Union cannot accept that Warsaw is kind of playing the game the way they do. But the general question is, does this weaken the European Union's ability to take decision? And the answer is, of course, yes, because we are in a very difficult situation. I think Britain were balancing the decisions. We are now in overweight for the French bureaucratical system, and that is maybe not so easy.
Do you see France? Do you see Poland? It's an interesting question that just popped up. Do you see Poland as a natural ally of Germany, of Scandinavia, Nordic bloc, or as something totally else?
No, I don't see them like that. Somebody explained to me that in Poland we have two political wings. One is like Republican Trump, and another one is like Republican Bush. and this is kind of, it was not my way of seeing things, but this was a viewpoint offered to me. So, of course, the Nordic countries are different. They would probably be all, both left and right, seen as Democrats. So Poland, but Poland is an extremely important country. It's nearly 40 million people, and we should not ignore that. I think that is the lesson. At the end of the day, we cannot just think that this is not serious. It's extremely serious.
What are the most important issues which are being now discussed in Brussels? The issues which will affect us as well, and what is the power game? Reveal us what is the power game and power structures in there.
No, I think that if we wouldn't have managed to get a financial package through after the, how can you say, in the middle of COVID, we would have been in a situation like the one in 8 and 9 or 10, where we couldn't really finance the financial crisis at that time. So we would have faced severe difficulties because one thing is that Brussels will kind of not disappear, but the European Union as a credible political partner and a system which people would support would of course have difficulties if they can't solve real problems. And some way they managed to get the money right. The vaccination program went, I don't know how you feel it, but those sitting in the Nordic countries felt that it went all wrong.
Yeah. Let's not boast about it.
These are the last kind of decisions.
What about the Green New Deal and the whole thinking behind it? You know, as you yesterday mentioned that now the whole things which is coming from European Union in regulations on financing comes with a sticker of a Green New Deal and some greenery inside, and how it will affect the communities and businesses.
I think this is first time where there is linked money so clearly to a political ambition that we are to save the world.
First time ever, or first time in European Union?
No, first time so big.
Okay.
It's first, I mean, politics are driven now by Brussels, and it's influencing. How can you say the rest of the European countries? If you look at the European forestry strategy. Then those, if any of you happen to be a forest owner, then this was kind of the closest you could be to your land, your tree, your things. Now the European Commission is kind of slowly taking ownership on the CO2, how can you say, capability to store in a tree and kind of developing our trees into be our common resource and the union to have strategies for when you can harvest, if you call it that, the trees and forth and back. So I think we are seeing a structure where the European Union steps up its how can you say, its political ambitions, and they do that hand in hand with giving out the money.
Will they stop there? Will the European Union will become this, how the globalists used to say, likes to say, that the European Union will take over more of ambitions, like, I don't know, maybe in relationship to some kind of a China threat or China challenge to the European Union. Do you see that happening? Do you see that this process happening? Like European Union, it's a first but not the last ideological project which European Union can overtake.
But I think that is difficult because we have, especially as you spoke about, these different political groups of countries. And it is difficult for me to see who is actually the leader after Merkel. Who is it to make the deal with? You have the French election, it's next year in January, if I'm not mistaken. And we still don't know exactly how is it in Germany. And yeah. So,
Okay, thank you very much, Morten. And now we have some time for questions. Questions, or maybe saying that Morten is not right, or I was asking the wrong questions, or something like that. So, please. questions? Okay. A man in the back.
The European institutions are often criticized for a democratic deficit, and especially when they're interacting, when the bureaucrats of the European Commissions are interacting with the lobbyist groups or other business associations. So, from your experience, how this practices should change, that the public view of the European countries would change and the business practices would be more welcoming, and we would get rid of those labels as a democratic deficit and etc.
Thank you for the question. I think you can more or less even imagine the answer. So we are offering more knowledge in a kind of labeled way because it is so transparent and everybody in principle can follow it. We cannot meet with a European Commission official without having registered as a lobbyist. So the perception that it is an anti-democratic kind of organism is difficult for us to, how can you say, to handle, to do something with. But on the other hand, the opposite would be terrible, as I see it. So if you had 22,000 public employees, staff people in the Commission sitting there without having a feeling and nobody could kind of speak with them, that would not be very smart. I don't know if that is answer to your question, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Please.
Thank you for your interesting presentation and interesting dialogue. And I'm just wondering that you worked for trade unions, but now you are...
Sorry?
You worked for trade unions,
yeah.
as far as I know, but now you are a businessman, and you are on the other side. Right?
So this is what I asked this question. Yeah, I asked this question.
Yeah, but it's not a question.
It's a observation. I told him that. So asked, does Morten feel that he changed sides?
But I think there is nothing on what I do which is anti-trade union. I think what we do in our work is creating wealth, taxable money, works to work in. We are contributing. So I don't feel different on what I do now than what I did then. Then I also tried to help people to get things right.
Yeah, but I also wanted to tell you that it's my observation based on my talks with some colleagues. Just a moment, my observation. But I wanted to say that this thinking that this is a zero-sum game between trade unions and business is a very stupid thinking. You know, it's a very stupid Lithuanian style because people think that they will be good trade union or good business association if we will totally kill the trade union, labor unions, you know, and this is not the case, because most of the case both parts want that the working places would remain and they would grow and people will become much richer in the process and they will keep their working conditions. But if you start imagining as a zero-sum game, that kind of creates this thinking that, you know, that if trade unions lose, then business win, or something like that. It's not the case all the time. It's very Donald Trump thinking.
Can I ask a question? It was just observation. But my question is actually, I want to bring back you to Brussels when you worked for.
Sorry?
I want to bring you back to Brussels when you worked for trade union.
Yes. Yeah, Confederation of European Trade Union, ETUC.
And my question is, so I think that you implemented a lot of projects, a lot of ideas during the war. And because we are studying how lobbyism is functioning, not in every country, but how it's functioning in the EU, my question is, could you tell or provide for us at least 2 examples? Then you succeeded, and then you not. And why? Or perhaps it's too old.
In the European Union?
Yeah.
I was actually there was a directive called the Child Labor Directive, and that directive had to regulate when children could work in the European Union. And there were definitions on when they could work, and I came from Denmark and we had one definition. Then there was a lot of discussions on what is a child and who does the child belong to. So a lot of Catholic organizations said that we cannot regulate a child's working condition if the child is working in the family, because the child does not belong to the society, it does not belong to the family. That's also why the French parents still can kind of hit their children if they want so, because that is not up to society to regulate inter-family relations. Now, we managed in the European Union to define these working conditions so that was a minimum standard, and that there was also exceptions for how you could operate that in countries. I can't exactly remember how it was, but it was a project taking 2 years in the European Union, and it had to take into account a number of what you could say you would call occupations which were not jobs, and it had to take into the, how can you say, the family situation. And the second step on this process was, of course, to make the floor in the European Union saying this is what we will accept as child labor conditions in the European Union. And then we took it to the next layer, saying that, and we will, by the way, not import products to the European Union which is lower than this. This directive meant that a lot of children got sacked in Bangladesh and Pakistan and other countries where they were working, and they were replaced with women. But no, this is true. But it had a real impact in the world. What we did actually mattered. And we were discussing that with the employers. I was sitting myself and drafting it with the person in the commission. So I felt that I am participating in making a difference. And if this would, let's say that I was working for a Sarah. I don't. But let's say I was working for them. They would also be interested in what we would call level playing field conditions. So everybody would have the same way of operating. But everybody hates in the market economy is that somebody is cheating. So it's much easier if we're all having rules and regulations which we can accept. And here I think trade unions and smart business people have the same interests. Does that count?
It was success.
It was success.
What about failure?
What about failure? You know, you don't count your failures. I can't.
Because of your?
Yeah, no. Of the trade unions, I remember. We had discussions on subsidies in the car industry, which meant that the European Union put harder burdens on, I think, research and development, that they should be done more in a nationalistic, on a national level, and that countries were not allowed to support companies from other countries. And that was a very hard day, because I was living in Belgium, and the Belgium unions were a big part of the European Trade Union Confederation. And Renault, they closed all their plants in Belgium overnight, like this. And we went out to, from the central office, we went out to a factory with 1,000 employees, where they had, all the cars were lined up. And then one of the union guys, he showed me the big plastic bag with all the keys. So he had taken all the keys. Each car have a key, you understand, and he has taken all of them. So they couldn't take everything away from him. So, and that was of course a failure, and you could see that failure, and you could see in the faces of these people losing their work overnight that this was a catastrophe. So the European Union gives and takes, and when you are in the middle of this game, you will see both sides.
Yeah, and you know, and if you will be able to somehow convince Renault together with labor unions and Renault to find a way how to save it, that would probably be a much better solution than, you know, somebody wins, somebody loses. You know, so it's there.
I actually work for 2 trade unions, and
You work for 2 trade unions.
Yeah, and I'm 27, so it's like really a big exception in Lithuania because all the progressive thinking is still associated with liberal conservative, right? So, you know, when you say I'm a social democrat, it's kind of as you coming out as part of the LGBT community. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's Lithuanian, yes.
Yeah, exactly. I think also with all the countries, you know, with Poland, it's a different story, but I have 3 questions connected to the trade
You
unions.
speak.
Sorry?
You said you speak.
No, she says she has 3 questions.
Yeah.
3 questions. That's a lot.
The first is, I know that, you know, after Reagan and Thatcher, the membership of trade unions went down, but
Yeah.
actually, I think in both countries especially, it was never high, except that, you know, during the occupation, it was mandatory to be a part of the trade union, but consciously people never actually thought of trade union as, you know, really important institution. So the first question is it not too late to make unions sexy in Baltic countries again, or for the first time?
In Baltic countries.
In Baltic countries, yeah.
Or everywhere, yeah.
Or we are already too late with this movement?
Okay, so that's the first question. That will be easier.
We take one by one.
Yeah, that will be easier, I think.
But this is an excellent consultancy assignment. I'm happy to help you with that. I moved to Prague in 1990, and it was partly financed by the trade unions because the social democratic youth were so close. And I explained to people in Prague that I came from the trade unions, and they saw the trade unions as being a kind of holiday camp organizer, and being in no kind of opposition to anything in society, just being kind of more travel or social club. So of course you need to change the perception a lot. And it is very, very difficult today where everything has become so individual. So how can you define a trade union differently as a political party if pay-related issues are not negotiated centrally? But there is still a lot of people in jobs where that is not the case. And how can you say? Manual, blue-collar, traditional jobs still need trade unions. I think that there is a way, but you really need to move out of the box and find some outside views. When I was a managing director, I looked at what was happening in all trade unions, and this was in 96, 97, and I looked at us for the last 10 years, and for each year we have been losing 1% of member. So I had to run a financing of the trade unions in Europe where I knew that I would have less money every year. So I started sacking 20% of the staff in order to have a kind of a little bit of money to play with, and then we started to increasing fees from the national organization with 1.5% per year. So we were a little bit ahead. But the strategies on how trade unions come back to society, there we are close to a Nobel Prize.
Yeah, actually my second question was a bit connected to that because I think that it's only my observation, but I think that labor rights are actually eliminated from the discourse of human rights, which should be, I think, connected because when we talk about traditional labor movements, we usually talk about labor law, you know, but there are a lot of work which is not regulated anymore under the labor law, but it's regulated under civic law, you know, for example, even the couriers,
Gig economy, yeah. Mm-hmm. That's very American question. This is what is being now very hotly discussed at the moment.
But you can say that the European Union currently have the health and safety regulation. And everything which goes under health and safety will be European Union area, and it can be decided, adopted in Brussels, and has to be implemented in the countries. Everything which is, how can you say, performance-related pay, holiday, maybe we have you could argue that can be a minimum holiday period, but all the pay-related issues are individual. In some countries there are minimum pay systems, and in some countries they want to have pay as the negotiation point. And guess why? Because otherwise people would not be members of trade unions. So I think it's we help some of these new companies in the delivery business to make collective bargaining agreements, not because they wanted to do it, but because it became a condition for them to pick up food from restaurants, where the restaurants workers were member of different trade unions. So that those trade unions say that we don't want to give to these delivery companies the food, because they are in principle taking our waiters' job, if you can say it like that. So we want that you are then having a collective bargaining agreement. And we had a lot of discussions with these delivery company if that was needed. And it was not needed like it was requested by the workers, but it was requested by people other places in the society, because they said they want everybody to be organized.
It's a bit like with child labor, so we want to have a level playing field for everyone. And
yeah, because in Lithuania we also have one of the leading people who organized the Carriers Union, so we also try to talk with delivery companies and so on, but then again everything goes to European level, because they say that if they change something in Lithuania, that means that they need to change it in Estonia, Latvia and so on, so basically we are waiting for years why you love this.
But that's how the European Union works.
And the third question is very practical one, about the Confederation of European Trade Unions. Do you see it as a trade union which works as a facilitator, meaning that the members who belong to the Confederation, they get the holidays, as you mentioned before, I don't know, lawyers and so on, or do you think that it actually organizes itself from down to top?
From down to top. It's the Confederation of European Trade Unions is not a trade union. It is a confederation, and it is what can you call it, an umbrella organization. I think it has today 73 members in the member states, and even in non-member states, because they have decided that regardless of what the European Union are, then the workers are Europeans.
Okay.
So how can you say it? It's not a question of if your country is member of the European Union. It is a question if your countries are member of the European Trade Union Confederation. We had a lot of fun with that.
Elaborate on that fun part.
Sorry?
Elaborate on the fun part.
On the last part?
On the fun part.
No, the fun part was that that we could have people from non-European Union countries entering to discussions and deals with European Union officials, because we as an organization were representing under the Maastricht treaties rules and regulations the worker side, but it was not said that it should be kind of nationals of the European Union. So, for instance, Norway is a member of the European Trade Union Confederation. We had Norwegian as official language. We had 3 other official languages as well.
Okay, so last question, please, or last comment, or saying? Oh, no last questions? I still left some time for the last question.
No, you're over time.
Yeah, but we are over time, but the lecture is not over time. So,
okay.
So the lecture I think is still 5 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, but if there are no questions, I want to thank you very, very much for gathering. I want to thank you very much for the questions and for the insights. And of course, Morten, thank you very much for coming and letting share your wisdom. It's really interesting. You know, it's interesting to see where we stand at the stage. And yeah, good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.